Hi, everyone, and welcome to season 2 of Conversations. I can't believe it's already been pretty much a year since we started this. So super exciting, and hope you all had a wonderful summer too. So our first panel of the season will be on the business case for conversation designers. And this was started as a conversation on LinkedIn from Guillerme. And we'll post the original link in the chat to the post. But yeah, it just got a lot of traction, and it seems like it's a pretty hot topic, and there's a lot to discuss. So yeah, let's just get started with some introductions, and then we'll get into the questions. So Anne, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. Anne Cantera. This is kind of interesting. I was a conversation designer at LexisNexis, but now I am a multimodal AI designer at LexisNexis. And I'm just super stoked to be here and a kind of honored to be in all your company.
Thanks for being here. Martin, want to go next?
Yeah, my name is Martin Andersen. I work for the Conversation Design Institute on the services side. So we help companies who might not have a conversation designer yet, or who have but need some help in optimizing their chatbot. And prior to that, I was at Google working on the Google Assistant, but my background is really copywriting. But yeah, really happy to discuss this.
Awesome. Christine?
Next, Christine Champ, and I have worked in conversation design for a while, and I have done everything from robots, wellness robots, to virtual assistants, voice, kind of chatbots, every kind of, even Gen AI search assistants. So I've kind of been covering all of the ground in conversation design in the past few years, and so I'm really excited to be here as well and talk with you all about the changing landscape.
So Caio?
Hi, everybody. My name is Caio Calado. I'm speaking to you from São Paulo, Brazil. I am a conversation designer since 2016. I have been around. And today I am in a bit generic position. I'm kind of helping others to not become only conversation designers, but also work with conversational AI. So it's really exciting to be here. And I think that I can learn so much with you, and maybe I can share a few things. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so I guess we'll get into the first question. And I know this is kind of a loaded question, and I know it varies depending on the project and company and type of conversational AI experience. But based on your experience, what does a conversation designer do? Who wants to get us started?
Are we going around again, or just?
Oh no, just jump in. Just yeah.
Oh, okay. This is so funny because this question has come up a lot for me talking with other conversation designers for multiple reasons. The first reason is, how do you define yourself in your current role that you're in, and also in this changing marketplace with Gen AI? How do you define yourself? And when Anne mentioned being a multimodal AI designer now too, this really hits on a lot of what people have said to me when we've come together to discuss this. And in my experience, a conversation designer is actually, in really simple terms, a UX designer for conversational experiences. But what I'm also seeing, and this is even in job descriptions and talking to other people, is that it's a product designer for AI assistants or AI agents. So I think when you look at it that way, it's a role where it's applying all these both specific to conversation design UX principles and also some general UX principles to a product or solution, all the way from concepting, what is, the ROI, what are the KPIs, UX research, persona development, to actually crafting and designing the experience, which is also 360, like the visuals, also not just the dialogue and the content, the media that interacts. And then later, after launching that, evaluating analytics, testing all of that. So it just really runs a wide scope of things that I think companies aren't always aware of when they just look at, say the dialogue for a chatbot and think that, you can just either hook that up to an LLM or just have somebody write some Q&As.
Does anyone else want to jump in? Yeah,
Go on,
go for
Caio.
it.
You can go, Marcin. I would talk about CDI, for example. I think
Oh,
you're
okay.
going to talk something about CDI.
No,
Maybe
no,
I
not
can
at all.
add a different perspective.
I will leave that to you, but I was just going to say, just adding on to what Christine was saying, I think it's also shifted a lot. I think when we started out, it was very, I would say a lot of us, all of us have come from different backgrounds. So that doesn't help in explaining what we do because there's no direct way into it. So some of us come from a different perspective, like to focus more on, like, say, the UX side of it. Other people like to focus more on the tech side of it. But I would say it has shifted very much from we just write the words for the chatbot to more of a, as Christine was saying, more of a UX design kind of product development, but also very much about strategy as well. And I think that's definitely something we're seeing a lot from CDI as well, is that yes, people can now use an LLM to create something, but it still doesn't make them go anywhere near where they want to go. Or maybe the LLM has overhyped their expectations. So you need someone like me to be boring and say, you can't really create this, and it's probably better if you just kind of stay within the NLU model for that one. But yeah, that's just what I wanted to add. So, Caio, please talk about CDI if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I love this perspective, and also I really enjoy what Christine said about what is a conversation designer. One day I was having a conversation with a friend that is a product designer. She was like, "Oh, I can be a conversational designer," and I don't know, like many conversation designers are product designers if you look at that perspective. But it's not that every product designer is a conversational designer, because there are some nuances, some maybe perspectives, go-to or use of frameworks or even tools that is a bit different. If you know how to use it, of course, you're going to push some deliverables and also some results. But maybe the idea is that not every product designer is a conversational designer, which I love the idea that Christine kind of mentioned it. And what I was about to say about CDI, I don't know if it's still like this. Marcin, please correct me if I'm wrong. But CDI has some offering for at least 3 areas for conversational designers, which is a designer per se, but kind of focus more on the strategy. There is the copywriter and also the AI trainer. I like this idea, but it doesn't translate well to the ecosystem that I'm based on. So down here, we have different positions that kind of have some intersection with conversational designer. For example, service design. To be honest, I started to work with conversational design because of service design. I think in the end of the day, we are dealing with systems which are just services in a way, and the conversation is just a medium for that service. So I started from that perspective, and then I worked my way to UX and product strategy or conversational strategy. But yeah, you might be working with training, you might be working with the strategy side, you might be working with just the conversations or the writing of that conversations. But there are some other nuances that these people might be working with conversation design, but that doesn't mean that they are a conversational designer. And I'm not saying that conversational design is everything, just to be clear. But there are some nuances that some people, they focus more in different areas, and that's kind of depends of the company, the project that the person is working on. So it's different from one context to the other. But the thing is, if we have the literacy, the ideas, the knowledge about the frameworks or the tools that we can use, this can speed up the project, and it can add a lot to anything that we are building through a conversation. So that would be my 2 cents.
Absolutely. Anne?
I was right there with Christine. My first thought when you asked the question was, what don't I do?
Right.
So yeah, I think plain and simple, for me, it's just being wherever the project needs at the time they need it, and doing the best I can to fill whatever shoes that need filling.
Right.
But I do think the title itself is evolving.
Mm.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
So yeah.
How do you think it's evolving?
Well, there's a lot more prompting, right? Less actual conversation writing, a lot more prompting, a lot more actual bot building, a lot of, I'm speaking for myself, a lot of collaborating with the developers, a lot of that for me. And for me also as well, because our company's so big, I mean, we have a team for everything. So there's a lot of collaborating with different teams for different things and things like that. But as far as writing the conversation itself, that's become a much smaller part of the job for me personally.
Yeah, great point. And since you mentioned working with developers more and collaborating more closely, I feel like this is like also a good opportunity to talk about what do you think are the benefits of having like a conversation designer as opposed to like only a developer or someone in IT or I don't know, like product owner or whoever else just work on the bot.
I mean, I think. Okay.
No, go ahead, Christine.
I know you can jump in. I jumped in last time.
I was going to say it's something, as I've been thinking about this for a while, and it isn't someone, as I said, my background is as a copywriter, so it isn't really new for me that people question why we're paying that guy over in the corner to write words when everyone can write, right? And I know, as Anne was saying, like it's less of a kind of, we're not really writing the whole journeys anymore, but there's still an idea of like, when it comes to the front end of just like, we'll just have to put in some words, people will know what it means, right? So there's always, I've always kind of felt that there's this justification of like, why are we hiring someone who doesn't, like, all he needs is necessary, like for a copywriter, just Word, basically, right? For this, you just need access to Miro or Figma or whatever you're going to like model in, right? And then some developer will be able to put it into a system, right? Unless you have those skills as well. But I think the benefit of having us, right? And so this is like the quote that I want on my gravestone one day, because I said it once in a job interview and I got the job. So for some reason it must have been quite profound. But I said the problem is that everyone can write, but not everyone can write. Right? So you always have like a CEO who thinks that they're the new whoever is the like most popular person in the world, and they can somehow get the tone of voice right, because they kind of know the company, they started the company, or they've been at the head of the company for a while. But usually it kind of drifts into like, they don't really know how to write on behalf of someone else, right? That's the copywriter part of me, and that's the UX part of me, right? That's why someone like us is still needed. I would also add to what Anne was saying before of where it's drifting into is, yes, a lot of it is prompt design or prompt engineering. But I would also say one of the things that I've seen more and that I really enjoy is the more like kind of the UX side, the behavior design aspect of it, and looking more at what are customers actually saying, right? And you can over-engineer something and it really works, you're not getting any bugs on it. But if the customer experience is still terrible, then you have a terrible chatbot or a voice bot or whatever it is, right? And you can really prompt everything out of like your chatbot. But again, if it gives you a too verbose an answer, or it's not quite what people are looking for, if you're not looking at what the customers are saying when they either fail with the chatbot or when they're going into the chatbot, then you have a problem. And I think that's where the value for us is that we know that we kind of have that psychology aspect of it as well, right? That's one of it, but I've hogged the microphone for too long, so I'm going to pass on to someone else.
I think we understand the difference between the and your, in the sense of the customer's having a hard time with something, and you're going to reference the return or the invoice versus your invoice. It shifts blame and it shifts energy, as in it's not your fault. And I don't think a dev would ever think of that, or a CEO would ever think of that. That's the nuance that I think the old school writer brings, is that writer / UX that brings that, I hate to say the word empathy, to say, you know, the tone of this is wrong. The tone of this could be better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that all of you are saying too. And it's like, again, you're bringing in someone who has a special set of UX skills in conversation design that understands the nuance of language and persona development, matching voice and tone, like you were talking about, Martin, and even things like the idea that, say with an LLM or just, I've had experiences where people are just like, oh, it's just questions and answers, right? But missing the niceties of an introduction, responding if someone says thank you, which can happen, and also keeping the conversation going, like those transitions in between getting answers or prompting someone, helping to guide them about what else they can talk about, just those conversational nuances. And also the pieces, again, what Martin said is you get the before and after of UX research strategy, persona development, and the after of does this work, what Anne was saying also, and making sure that this is a good experience. And I also think that your conversation designer is your champion so that you can continue to have the best experiences, because they're going to find out the latest industry tools, the best practices, the industry research, not only the data from your existing solutions, all of that good stuff.
Caio, anything to add?
Maybe I have a suggestion for Annie, which is pivot from empathy to talk about alterity. As designers, we need to understand the context of the users. It's hard for us to put the shoes of the other person, but we have tools to understand the context, and through that context, we can maybe have an idea or some hypotheses about what is going on, or maybe we try to have some approaches for specific hypotheses. And at least down here in Brazil, there are some UX groups that we have these discussions about moving from empathy to authority, which should be what designers should be working more than empathy. In the corporate world, we talk a lot about empathy, but it's really hard. For example, I don't understand how it is to be in London. I have never been there. I don't know what's the weather like over there, but I can try to understand or maybe have some idea. So that's the context, right? I may not have the feeling of being there, but I can try to find some proxy data to help me to have an idea, and that's how it can work. And I think that the business case, or why we should have conversational designers, is because of that. Like, we have a set of tools. Designers, we are good on understanding, framing, maybe have some skills to do research, and through that understanding, that framing, we kind of propose a solution. It's funny because the business or even the technical people, they look so much for the solution, but we can be that people like, hey, let's just step back for a moment, understand what we're doing here, and how we can go with this. And of course, there are some business and technical people that, of course, have that notion, right? Like, we have the user story, the backlogs, and things like that. But depending how the conversational designer works, this person can add some usability testing, or maybe some user research, and having a different approach for the conversations. Not all the time is a conversational designer. Sometimes might be a data scientist or some other people that can be working with you and give you some ideas. And that's a conversation. Like, you might be asking questions. Why is this happening? You might be giving suggestions to the developers about new ideas, or you can just share some insights for business people about to explore a new nuance or new functionality in the product. Business people is going to be pushing the business metrics. The technical is going to make sure that everything is feasible. But what about the user? How can we understand that side of it? So that's the case for conversational designing, especially on this time that customer experience, as Martin said, is so important for the companies, and it is the coin. It is what the people are looking at today. So yeah, it's a combination of skills.
I just
Oh, sorry. I was going to say really quick, that was great, because Anne and you both just like perfectly, I think, aligned on the simple thing again, is that like you're advocating for the user experience. That's what you're going to get from a conversation designer, because, it is the UX role, and they're going to look at the user pain points and goals, also merging that with the brand goals. And you're not going to get that, from a different, from say IT.
I just was going to ask, Caio, you were saying something like a word over empathy that you would empathize, like prefer another word. What was that word? Because I didn't really get it.
Maybe. I'm sorry, my pronunciation. I don't speak English every day, so I have this really strong
Oh, sorry.
accent right now.
How you speak
It's okay.
English? It was me not hearing
No,
it.
it's okay. But I'm gonna get better. I'm gonna get the hang of it. It's just riding a bike, language. It is alterity. In Portuguese would be alteridade. But alterity is more about understanding that there is another context and trying to not be that person, but the context of that person, how you can have a better idea of that. With empathy, it's well known that people, most of the times, they say like, hey, let's just put someone else's shoes and understand that. But it's really hard to understand that because I'm not that person. If maybe I have the context of that person, I might have a better idea of that. So it is really similar, but it's a bit different. One is more about the context of that side, and the other is just trying to be someone that you're not. So it's kind of hard. It's just me, as I said, trying to be how can I say a London person? Who is from London is what?
No.
What is the name for that?
Oh, I don't know what that is, but I agree in that sense of like, I think the flip side of empathy is also that when you design towards that, when you assume you know how someone is experiencing something, then you also end up creating biases without knowing it, right? And I think that's also something that we should be champions of, and I'm sure all of us are, right? But yeah, I don't, as Kai was saying, like, well, I know how it is to live in London because I do, but I have no idea how it is to live in Brazil, for example. I have friends who live there, right? So I can have an estimate of what it might look like, but I could never write on behalf of someone like that, right? I don't know what the word is, unfortunately. That's a good word to sum that up. Maybe I'm failing in that one. I would say another thing just on that topic as well, and it was where it worked really well, but actually from a conversation design point of view, it was terrible. And I will not name the client, mainly because of NDA reasons, but they were being measured on containment and volume, right? Which I think is quite common for a lot of people. This is a couple of years ago, so it's probably changed. That meant that they moved the goalpost, the developers, so that if they just threw all the information at the customer at the beginning, then it was contained. People had seen it. It was a terrible customer experience, right? But internally, everything worked. Everything looked great. They had high containment, and then no one had any time to kind of go back and look at it because they were also being measured on volume. So they kept having to throw, and within volume, optimization wasn't included, right? So it was just new stuff, right? So it just became this bonfire of just horrible experiences that I hope we managed to make better. I think we did. But in that kind of thing where it's like, no one will check that. Developers might not see that because everything checks out fine, right? But no one is stopping to ask, is the customer actually having a good experience here?
Right. And just quickly, we have a ton of audience questions. Oh my gosh. Brain not working. Does anyone else have other examples of experiences or like fails that have stood out in particular where there hasn't been a conversation designer?
Plenty. I'll let other people go.
Oh, did you want to jump in? I mean, I actually, some of the things that I mentioned earlier where they were having almost like the awkward silence in a conversation. Like we sort of just, where, you have an LLM and it answers the question and then nothing else happens, like there's no like follow up, like, was that helpful? What else would you like to know about? Here's some related, topics, other things that a conversation designer might think of when they're crafting a flow and an experience. Or even, when you work, together with an LLM and mix an LUN or some design, right? And then just like I'd said too, like not thinking of the random niceties or things that people might say, like, thank you, et cetera, and just having no responses for those. So, and then the other thing was not having a persona match. I'd seen something where the developers had created a chat bot and didn't really do the user research we're talking about, right, to find out what would match that, demographic, that user, and the tone was very generic, and just didn't fit, didn't end up engaging people.
Anyone else have any others?
I think that's interesting just between regular ChatGPT and ChatGPT voice. Voice is so much more conversational, finishes its response with a question, wants to keep you engaged. And that's within, one roof. There's that difference between the two.
That's true. Yeah. Great point.
So we're going to get to, there are tons of questions in the chat. So the first one is, how do you define the difference between prompt engineering and conversation design? I hate that word, prompt engineering. I'm just going to say it because I'm famous for having no filter. I like somebody said prompt design. I think that's, and they're two different things, but engineer is engineer. Leave it at that for me.
I think, go on, Caio. Sorry, I was going to.
No, please go on first.
I was just going to follow up with what Anne was saying now I think, and I speak mainly on behalf of myself, but I'm sure everyone knows, there's a lot of imposter syndrome within what we do, right? We've all, as I said, we've all drifted into this from all kind of different ways, right? So I think if we give ourselves fancy job titles, we make it sound, and also a lot of us sit in rooms with tech people and have very little knowledge of tech when it comes to like hard coding and all these kind of things. So if we can pretend that we're designers, or we can pretend that we're engineers, or architect is another one that I like, that I've seen a lot, where it's like, we're not any of them, right? Maybe we're designers, I'll steal that one, right? But it's somehow, it gives us some sort of like raison d'etre of like, this is what we, or like a credence to what we do, right? But we're not engineers. I think prompt designers is one thing, but I think there's still differences in that. I think it's a discipline that it might shift into, but I think conversation design and prompt design are two different things. And I think this is my forecast that I'm probably going to be proven wrong, but I think we're going to drift. It's going to have that split. It's going to probably fracture a lot more, but there will be more UX designers and there will be people who do prompt design, and maybe they overlap, but I think we're not all going to be conversation designers in a couple of years. That's my thing. But Caio, please take over.
I love what you said about everybody's a designer. That's why, for example, I started saying that I am in a bit generic position because I do so many things. But still, in the end of the day, I think that I'm still a designer. So I like this question, and it is kind of important to say that there is the engineering side of it and there is the design side of it. There is someone that is going to think about the structure, how that model is going to work, what is the best performance, what is the latest, maybe organization, feature, architecture that is going to make the model works better. And there is someone that is going to kind of fill up through on that architecture and make the things kind of happen. So think about a building, right? A 10-floor building. Someone is going to build that infrastructure, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be the same person that is going to fill all the floors with the decorations and all the things. This is a silly example, but it's really important. This is a great question because sometimes we kind of do everything. We think about how we are going to lay out the prompt, what is going to be the prompt itself, which is a bit of the design. But they're different. And these are two different sets of knowledge or skills. And on top of that, there is also conversational design, which is a different knowledge that kind of leverage or drink that water of LLMs or something like that. And they can be working with these two skills. Maybe in some companies, you might be just focusing on the prompt design and trying to make a better prompt for that. But in some other context, you might be doing kind of the engineering part of it. Maybe you do both of them and you don't know about it. But they are different. And if you are not an engineering or you don't like to talk about that kind of stuff, it's fine. You can just focus on the design part of it. It's not that one is better than the other, but they are just two sides of the same coin. They kind of have the same purpose, but they have different materialization of the things that is going to happen. So I'm sorry, just to say something. I am Brazilian, and Brazilians talks a lot, so I'm gonna just.
No worry.
I hope I can sharing some interesting things for you.
Oh,
Yeah.
definitely. We're all conversation designers, so we love conversation.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, like, quickly for me too, it's like conversation design is more high level. Prompt design is a tool that a conversation designer will use if they're designing an experience that's, using Gen AI or LLMs.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Giulia, were you gonna?
No, I was just actually, Christine anticipated my follow-up question, which was going to be, how do the two relate? But I guess we have more audience questions, so we can to Nathan, who's asking, what tools, approaches have helped you better speak to the needs of the business, i.e., justifying the role and showing clear results?
And I think I'll also add here, like, how do you show ROI too? Or are there ways you can measure ROI? And do you want to start with this one?
I feel very spoiled with this answer, but I have a metrics team. And I'm also blessed to be in a company that really cares about UX. So it's not just the metrics that answer these questions. We test quite a bit among ourselves and outside, and I feel like also again it depends. What are you designing and what's the purpose of it? Is it meeting its purpose? Are you still are you giving a good user experience? Are you meeting the needs of the business? So I think there's a lot to this to unpack.
I'm going to go back to what I said before about my copywriting background. I know I keep going back to that, and that's not what the conversation is about. But again, it's very much like if you try and kind of monetize that and say, I've had someone say, how many words can you write per hour, right? And it was like, okay, well, that's going to make some terrible end products for that. But because sometimes you're inspired, sometimes you're not. But anyway, that's just how I work. But it is quite difficult to prove like how much. You can obviously go in and look at like how many calls have you deflected, for example, in that sense, like how many handovers have you saved by actually containing it in the chat, in that sense, right? That's a very easy way. One of the ways I like to look at it, and that's a little bit more difficult to measure it, is because it's also from what I do in CDI is probably slightly different than what a conversation designer in a company would do. Like we go in and help companies, right? So I can go in and say there's something wrong there, and then I wave goodbye and leave, right? But that also helps me, and I can prove my worth, and I say like, where are your pain points, right? And I can look at that, and that's why, as Caio has been saying as well, like using a lot of data as well to back that up, and saying like, well, everyone is like abandoning the chat there. Do you think this might be X, Y, and Z for why they're doing that, right? And then after that, you can prove, well, actually, then you have all your NPS scores and your CSAT, so you can prove that actually people are having a better comes in. But we never know. You can't. No one's ever going to say, like when they fill in the feedback, saying like that was really well designed, right? So it is difficult to explain, but I think some companies just get it, as Anne is saying. Like if you just have companies that get it, then you don't need that conversation. But it is, I would say, it is just knowing that your customers are having a good experience, knowing that you can probably save a lot in the chat. You don't always just have to punt it to like a handover. That's where I would see our worth.
I think too, like I think what Anne was saying too earlier is like you kind of just have to start at the beginning of the project and you sort of set your KPIs, your goals, your pain points, as Martin said. So you already know what you're going to measure. Like the best way to know if you're successful is to have what you're going to measure to start. I mean, sometimes you do also see other things, analytics that you weren't planning on measuring that give you good information. But if you start with here's the KPIs, here's the goals, here's how we're measuring ROI, is it we're trying to have less calls to the call center, like Martin said, or is it that we want more people to sign up for something, or a feedback survey rating, at the end of the conversation, like you set those up in the beginning and then you can go back to the analytics and say, look, we met the ROI that you set, the KPIs, and this is how we're getting our return on investment. And also maybe we found some other good things that, showed that it was successful and maybe some other things to improve,
I also think it's on based on my experience, it's also good to have visibility with leadership and to be able to like share all the
Yeah,
metrics
for
and
sure. 100%.
share-
Yeah.
even like reviewing conversations, just taking something and just showing like, oh, this is how it improved, like how it made it better for users and stuff.
We've always done like dashboard reports and analytics, like whether it's like with stakeholders or like if you have clients, like 100% agree with you. Yeah, you need to show that the data.
Yeah. Caio, anything?
I agree with everybody. Maybe if I just thought that it was funny what Martin said about someone asked him how many words you can write. How was the question?
How many words can you write per hour? You'd be surprised how many times that's being, not for me, but that's generally because it's trying to like make you into a kind of quantifiable entity, right? Where it's like it's about the quality, not the quality, the quantitative measure of your work, not the qualitative.
What's your worth?
Yeah, right. It's crazy. Like, what's your work rate? Right. It's like okay, that's not. This conversation is starting out on the wrong kind of like foot, right? But you'd be surprised, right? And it's again, as I said, for like conversation science, some of the clients I've seen, again, without naming them, it's like you'd be surprised, right? Where it's like, why didn't you think about this? Or like the common pain points, or what they were measuring, or actually sometimes that they weren't measuring at all. So you have to kind of start from nowhere, right? And it was just like, what were you, or like, as soon as you go into it, it would say like, or you can just ask me to, you can just say, speak to a human. And it's like, you just defeated the whole purpose of a chatbot here, right? So it's like, why do you have such low confidence in your work from the very beginning, right? But yeah, so I've seen a lot of these things, and same thing as the how many words do you write per hour?
Maybe not for you, but if someone is in a meeting and someone makes a really weird question like that, maybe the person can ask, why do you want to know that? What is the end point of this? And maybe you can have an idea about where you should be or where they want to go. And one thing that a really small exercise that can help everybody is just to try to kind of write down a network effect. Like, this is where we want to go. This is the metric that we have. How can I make this like an effect or a cycle that is going to go to that direction? I'm adding to the comment section an example of that, the network effect, and some of the UX ROI metrics or ways to see how we can deliver or kind of push the results. But another exercise for conversational designers is trying to understand what is the metric that we are looking at. It is a business metric, is a operational metric, is a user metric. And from that perspective, you kind of can work your way up. Sometimes you might be focused too much on the business side of it. Some others you might be just focused on the user. And some others you might be just kind of pushing an operational metric of the project. It is really important for you, conversational designer, to understand that at the end of the day, you're helping business to achieve their goals. I love the idea of writing. I like writing great conversations, but in the end of the day, at least in Brazil, we have a saying that we have boletos, which is paper bills, which kind of we make fun of that. In the end of the day, we need to pay that bills, and we need to do that. We need to be really pragmatic about it. There is a business that wants to push some results, and it is your job to try to articulate or try to get there in the best way possible. You as an specialist, you might negotiate some deliverables or some ways of doing that. But yeah, try to focus on these three pillars and see where you are. Sometimes it might be all of them, sometimes it might be just one of them, and try to focus on that and build your business case on top of that.
So I'm going to get to another question. This is about what are challenges specific to voice-based conversations? And are there specific skills a conversation designer should have for voice? And are there specific changes because of LLMs? For me, like, go ahead. Yeah. For me, when I was first starting, it felt like voice and conversation design were kind of separate. And then it's kind of like merged with LLMs and kind of come together more as a community. I don't know if anyone else has
I'm not gonna answer that. I'm gonna skip, but I'm gonna I'm gonna talk about it. Why? Down here in Brazil, I don't know where you are, everybody. But down here in Brazil, about 96% of the smartphones in Brazil have WhatsApp installed. So down here, we are more chat based than voice based. That does not mean that we don't have voice bots or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying that I personally I'm more focused on chat, so I don't have many experience on voice.
I have some experience with. I think, yeah, as was just pointed out, that it was like it used to be kind of like, well, voice, there isn't really a case for it yet. They're not really. It's like we'll look at it when it comes to it, right? I worked at it for the Google Assistant, which was fun, but still that was for its use case, and there was still a lot of problems with it. But I think voice has like different challenges in terms of like it's much more difficult to design for because it's much more 3D than just the chat surface, right? You don't have you can't rely on the text that people can read while they're doing it, so you have to be very clear. I see there's a question coming up as well about inclusivity. So there's obviously different accents, that people with vulnerabilities, disabilities, people that speak in a different way, non-native speakers, all of that you have to factor in when you do it. And I would say another thing, especially with LLMs and the improvement of voice technology, is the uncanny valley, which I'm sure you've all seen. If you've done the CDI course, you've definitely seen it. I like talking about it, but basically the idea that you get too close to be human, but you kind of just fall short, and then it just gets really creepy. And if you have a voice bot that speaks like an old IVR system, everyone kind of gets on board with that. That's kind of the premise that we've learned to accept. If you suddenly have a voice that does little kind of like speech markers, like it coughs, it does like a or like it gets really creepy very quick, right? Because it's like, why does like a digital being need to clear its throat that it doesn't have, right? And it's that maybe in a couple of years we'll get used to that. We worked at it with Google for a bit and had to take it out because it just became like really creepy that it would say like, yeah, sure, right? You don't think about it, but people kind of don't want it to be too human either. So that's the other aspect of it. You really have to think about everything you're doing when you do voice. Chat is a little bit easier, but also has its pitfalls.
And I was going to say too, like you totally hit on, like I've worked on some voice experiences where we had trouble with different accents, and not even just international, but like across the country, like how people would say things, or even maybe how they would express an answer. And the other thing that I've come across is that with voice, if you're giving people options, right? Like say it's an IVR survey or something like that, they can only recall so many things.
Yeah.
So you have to be really concise, or have follow-ups or, options for repeating things so that, they can, understand and not feel overwhelmed by the information. Whereas, in chat, you've got these visual cues that break it up. You can add images, other things like that. With voice, it's just potentially a bunch of words that could be overwhelming.
Yeah.
So Giulia, did you want to jump
No,
in?
I was going to bring up another question that I was seeing from the chat. I think, oh my God, there's so many of them, but one,
I know.
I'm being kind of like egoistic with picking this one because I'm hoping it will be interesting and relevant for us all. What are things you're all doing to keep your tools sharp, so to speak, as conversation designers? How do you stay ahead of the curve? And how are you growing? And I feel like this is really like going back to the topic of the panel. So any tips from anyone?
And also to add, are there any specific things that you've seen companies are looking for that you feel like conversation designers should know?
I mean, I think one thing that they're definitely looking for, which, we've all been talking about, is Gen AI skills. Like they're looking for prompt design skills, that you've used tools with, RAG, things like retrieval augmented generation, where you're able to take and create a database of content and, upload it from a source that's regulated, private information. So I think they just want to see Gen AI skills and that you've used different Gen AI tools, whatever those are, and that you work with LLMs.
I would also say something I've come across from a lot of people is, I don't know if there's a word for it, but a kind of a fatigue in trying to keep up. Because what we might learn today, it might be obsolete next month because there's going to be a new rollout of ChatGPT, whatever, right? So there is this kind of like, where do I focus, right? And if we were any other, maybe not any other, but say we were doing something else that was more kind of static in terms, if we were accountants, and maybe I'm kind of throwing all accountants under the bus, right? You could say like, this is what you need to learn, then you're an accountant. But because our role is developing as we speak, it's so difficult to kind of narrow it down, right? So you just run around, you read a bit, and then you become like, it's very easy to become like a jack of all trades, master of none, right? But what I've found, because I've definitely had it myself, is I think, and maybe it's the bad advice to give, and it's like very easy to say, but it's like, focus on what you really enjoy within this job. I would agree with what Christine's saying, like certain things you have to learn, like and show like generative AI skills. But if prompt design, if that's really not what you're into, if you like behavior design more, go down that road. Right? If it's the other side, you hate the behavior design of it, but you want to look more at prompt design, focus on that, because at some point you will need to specialize. And I don't think necessarily that either of those can be obsolete, but if you're trying to catch up constantly, you're just going to run out of breath. And I think that's where a lot of people are stuck.
Yeah,
I also wanted to.
Go ahead. I was going to say what Martin said. Yeah, it is really hard to keep up. And I think we've talked about that the role is evolving and we don't know where it's going to land, what even the job title will be in the future. And that's like a big question. And we're all trying to figure out what skills do we need. And even things like, voice has changed, chatbots. Now we've got soul machines and digital persons. And like, we don't even know what the mediums are going to be going forward. The most popular uses for, say, virtual assistants. And now we've got agents, right, that can, the rabbit, things that can like actually do things for you. So I think it's probably just, more like what Martin is saying, is just like maybe find a great industry blog or something, talks like these where you can just see what is the latest thing, explore that. Does it seem like something interesting that would help you with your skill set, because it is evolving so fast. We're not sure where it's going to land.
And I'm also going to add in one more question that we had earlier, and it's how much is knowing the tools like DFCX, VoiceFlow, et cetera, help a conversation designer? And do you have any recommendations? And I guess tooling's changing too.
I was going to say, I've used VoiceFlow, Bot Society. I think it really helps to have knowledge with some form of those tools, but you don't know what the company you're working for, say if you're going to a new job, is going to use. Sometimes they'll have I've used in-house tools, at startups to design it. So it's kind of, I think it's good to know at least one of those tools like VoiceFlow to just get a grounding in what those tools are like, or Dialogflow, just to have that, because then that way, if say you were to switch to a different job where they have different tools, you can probably transition, pretty easily.
Yeah, exactly that.
I know, Anne, you've...
Oops.
Oh, go ahead.
Please, go in first.
And I know you've experimented with a lot of tooling and stuff. Do you have any thoughts on?
I do. I have a new love. I love chatbotbuilder.ai. I think they dive into what the future. It's mostly prompting. I think they're 18 months ahead of everybody. That's my personal opinion. It's easy to use. Getting closer to being enterprise ready, I think. But going back to doing things, I think it's important to know your foundations as well, though. Like, I don't think somebody, so I work a lot with Tech Fleet. We have thousands of brand new young UX designers in there. And when they ask me about conversation design, I never push them towards the easiest, because you have to learn your foundations. And going back to one of the questions from earlier, one of the things I say to them when they ask me about conversation design, I say, think about a flow you've built, maybe something relatively simple, and now design it with words. Design it. One of the sayings that somebody said to me a while ago that really stuck is, the future of UI is no UI. So, if you want to see if this is for you, find a flow. and build it with words and see how it feels and see if it jives for you, because there are those Figma people who will never ever want to give up UI. This might not be the path for them, and I get it. I'm an artist. I understand needing to be around color, but it's a good little test to see if this is a path you might be interested in, not just because there are more jobs, it seems anyway, in conversation than traditional UX right now. Feel it out first. Do your research before you make a decision, and I feel like that's a quick, easy little check to see if this is for you or not.
Switching gears a little bit, I'm just curious, have you generally found your roles as they've been advertised usually, or do you find yourself doing something completely different than what you thought you were going to do? And I know with some job descriptions, they just throw everything in there. Like you have to be just everything design coding. Okay.
Maybe it's an answer to that question, but is also an answer to the before that one. As designers, usually we help other group of people with other needs to do whatever they need. So everybody here talk a little bit about conversational design and even tooling. Maybe my suggestion for that is just to go in another direction. Maybe read a book about business, sales. Just to give you an example, I work today in a customer success division, so I needed to study there to have the literacy. What is a customer success? What is that? I never heard of it. Actually, I did have heard before, but I thought that I understood in the beginning, but then when I started to read it, it's different of what I thought that before. And maybe the way of saying that is that maybe trying to understand how a sales team work or customer success team work. Most of the times you're either dealing with a marketing team, with a sales team, or you're just working a customer experience division to do whatever they need. So maybe read a book about that and have an understanding about how that works. But about writing, this is just a silly suggestion from me. I started to watch table reading from movies and series. I love Better Call Saul. I don't know if anyone of you have seen any table reading. They are on YouTube. And there are some books of that. One of them, this is the Manual of Script from Seinfeld. This is a great book. It is just for movie writing. It gives you so many ideas about how you can write better. Or maybe business model generation can help you to understand a little bit the business side of it. So maybe my suggestion is focus on what you need from conversational design, but don't forget that you're working with other people from other areas. And most of the times, in all cases, is either customer experience, sales, or marketing. If you have a better understanding about that area, you might have the vocabulary to dealing with that people. So that would be my suggestion. And for today, it's hard to see a job description that I fit because there's so many different things that it's kind of hard.
Anyone else?
I would say one of the things we spoke briefly about going live was also I think a lot of companies are now also trying to add to what they can get in this. And maybe that's a sign of that the job market is a bit kind of not nice at the moment. But again, going for the third time, going back to when I was a copywriter, suddenly people were looking for copywriters who could also design, who also were graphic designers. That's kind of two in one, right? And now they're looking for conversation designers who can also develop or whatever or something. So it's you're looking for a unicorn that is kind of twice the unicorn, right? And it would also be great if they can speak Mandarin and Hungarian at the same time, right?
Right.
So it's that's very niche, right? So I don't know. I think I've worn so many different hats. It's also because it's as a consultant, I go into different companies, and then I would say the major part, and I think that's what Caio is saying as well, is stakeholder management is a big thing as well, at least for me, right? So it is what does the marketing team see in this, and what does the sales team see in this, right? And also importantly, how do they engage with each other, right? Because there's a lot of, as an outsider, you go in and there's a lot of friction between them, and you have the power of being the outsider, but sometimes you have to walk very carefully, right? But I think in terms of job descriptions, there are a lot of different hats to wear in this, because there isn't a determined kind of idea of what you get when you buy a conversation designer, right? So, but I think the flip side of that is most of us, if not all of us, are very adaptable, right? Because we have done this before in different roles, right? So we know that we need to look at something else. We're all trying to upskill, as I can see from the chatters at the moment as well, right? So we know we can't just rest on our laurels, right? But yeah, it is a strange thing of reading job descriptions and seeing like what people are looking for, because they're hoping for too much sometimes.
And we were
maybe, sorry, to extend the question to Christina and Anne on to add something from the chat on, would you say that if one can, for example, design a healthcare bot, they can also design a finance or e-commerce bot? Like, in being versatile, would you consider the domain something where we're able to move across quite swiftly? Or would you say a conversation designer that has worked on healthcare would not be able to work on finance and so on?
I would definitely think you can do both. Yeah, it's the same core principles. You're maybe dealing with different voice tone personas. Maybe there's different legal requirements, things with language. But I think it's essentially the same core skills across whatever the content and the user happens to be. Whether it's for e-commerce, for healthcare, there are definitely things that are different about each. But I think you can definitely transition those skills.
It's like saying, can you build a website for a restaurant versus a website for a doctor's office? Yeah. The bots themselves, in my futuristic opinion, will become the site eventually, and some of it will depend on your subject matter experts. I couldn't do what I do without the subject matter experts that I'm provided. But I think the future is in those bots. So it's good to be well-rounded, and you should try to be well-rounded. Don't pigeonhole yourself, especially if you're trying to find a job in this market.
Yeah.
And we just very quickly, I know we're almost at time, so I'll do one more question, and then we'll end off with a final question. But we were talking about contract jobs, and it seems like a lot of companies or conversation designs are contract right now. Do you have an idea of like why that is, and why companies don't seem to want to invest in hiring conversation designers full time?
I have my suspicions, in the sense that in the last year and a half, everyone has been like bedazzled by generative AI, right? And that also means companies hiring, because they're like, why should we go out and pay someone loads of money when I can literally just put a prompt into it myself, right? And then something goes wrong, and then they either contact CDI and we go in and help them, or they hire someone to come and do it, or both, right? So I think it's just that hype of like, they might want to kind of try before they buy, in that sense of like they want to see, and if it goes wrong, if it's a contract worker, they can stop their contract tomorrow, if like it's better than hiring someone full time. So I think there's a kind of cautiousness in seeing our worth at the moment, because there's a lot of tools out that they can buy and think that they've kind of covered themselves. That would be my guess.
And do you have?
Yeah, I had thoughts on this for sure. One, I think it's not just these roles. First, I think a lot of UX roles in general are contract right now. It gets them out of paying for medical benefits, which, we know they care about that. But also, I think they're not really sure what the ROI on a chatbot's going to be. Yeah. Right? They don't know what they're getting into. So this is just kind of a sample moment where they'll say, all right, let's try this out. I see 3-month contracts all the time, and I'm like, 3 months. I mean, in enterprise, that's like 2 years. So I think it's a multitude of things, and I think it's just a safe bet for the people writing the checks.
And also, I think it's like, as you're just saying, and I think for a lot of people, for a lot of companies, a chatbot is a project. It isn't a long-term thing, right? So a project is 3 months, 6 months, whatever, and then you've delivered it, and then it will go live, and it'll be fine for all like for eternity, right? So you also have to kind of persuade them in that. But I think that is probably why people are seeing it as well. Like, it's just a project. Once we've delivered, then it can sit on itself.
And I think it's very short-sighted because
Definitely.
bot optimization is going to be a huge job in the future.
Absolutely, it currently is as well. Just not enough people are seeing the value of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christine, Caio, anything to add?
I mean, I pretty much agree with I think everything you were saying is spot on. I'm seeing the same thing. It's like across the board for all roles, but also to Anne and Martin's point that, I think with Gen AI, they're not sure what the value is. And again, they're not looking at optimizations.
Yeah. Okay, so I have one last question, and that's, do you have any advice for companies that don't think they need conversation designers, or companies that are looking to hire conversation designers?
That's a good question. I would say the good thing is, like, if you don't, then there'll be you'll need a CDI down the line to come in and help you. So I would advise against hiring conversation. No, that's not true. No, I think, as I've said sometimes, much as I super love my job, and it's actually nicer to be part of it from the beginning, because as much as it is to troubleshoot, it's nice to get it right the first time around. And rather than kind of get super entangled and not know how to get out of it, and not knowing what platform you should get or whatever, even from that very early beginning, right? It's like just hire someone who knows their stuff, and you get it right the first time, and you don't have to pay extra to come and figure it out later, right? That would be my 2 cents on it.
I think the simple answer for me, and this, I find myself saying this on LinkedIn, not so much at work, but on LinkedIn all the time: spend it now, save it later. Like, that concept it used to be a mainstay business wise, and now it's just not a thing anymore. And it's obvious in a lot of the experiences we have, that's not the case.
I think it's kind of no-brainer. If the conversation is the median, of course we're going to need someone that is going to be in charge of that conversation. I think that how the conversation works is changing. We have LLMs today, we have the traditional, in quotes, chatbots, and now we have the new chatbots, in quotes. And there is that quote from Mike Tyson that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think that conversational designers might be it. I mean, it's just silly to think that in a future that everything is going to be kind of based on conversations, we are not going to have conversational designers. That's just weird for me to think of it. But I think that the conversational designers that we have today, they're going to change. They might be different in a few years. Other perspectives we're going to have. Just like with web designer, back in the 19s, 2000s, we saw a lot of them. Today, we see more specific positions related to design. And I think that's going to happen in the future. But that doesn't mean that they don't need it. In fact, they do need it. They just don't know yet. And then they're going to get punched. And then we're going to see later.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with everything everyone is saying. And it's, again, looking at it as a UX role, and also what Anne and others were saying, bots are going to be big going forward. And if you want to stand out in the marketplace, you want to create the best experiences that are successful, that stay successful, and that stay up with the latest, trends, modalities, all of that. And your conversation designer is not only going to help you create the best experience because they have all of that knowledge and skills, get the skill set, but they're also going to keep you, ahead of the curve with, finding out what is new. How can we improve this? Not only this existing solution, but what's the next big thing or medium? They're going to keep you at that forefront so that you can stay competitive in the market. And they're going to do the 360, wear all the hats, that we've been talking about, from, research to analytics, et cetera.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I know we're over time, but this was an amazing conversation. We could talk about this for
we should do
like
a part 2.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we have way more than enough for part 2, part 3. But yeah, I really appreciate you being here. This was a great conversation. And I know there were some other questions we didn't get to in the chat, but I'll respond to those and tag everyone. So yeah.
Thank you,
Stay
everyone.
tuned.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much. Stay
This was
tuned
super
for
fun.
more. Yeah, thanks.
Ciao.
You too. Bye.